Satisfactory 1.1 is officially out on the experimental branch, and while there are plenty of bugs and issues, hence the experimental tag, one part that works great is the new Photo Mode, which has actually already received some quality of life improvements since the initial launch. While not a gameplay feature, Photo Mode is already proving to be a popular way for players to enhance their screenshots, but Photo Mode has quite a few settings and it can be a little overwhelming. So, as an amateur photographer and photo editor myself, I figured why not go through each of the settings and explain what they do and how they relate to a real-world camera and photo editing tool. Now, since this is an experimental, as I'm making this video, check the pinned comment in the comments below where I will note any updates or changes that contradict or add to what I cover in this video. So first of all, to access Photo Mode, press P. You won't see any detailed settings at first, but as you can see, there are some hotkeys at the bottom. Left mouse button takes a photo if all you wanted to do is take a screenshot. You can also enable decoupled camera by pressing R, which allows you to detach the camera from the Pioneer and fly around. The default mode is to follow the normal view you get from the Pioneer's first-person perspective, and moving the Pioneer around will therefore move the camera. But decoupled mode gives you a free-moving camera. You can still use the regular WASD keys to move it around, space and C to go up and down, and the mouse to look around. You can also use Shift to fly faster. The distance you can get from the Pioneer is totally reasonable for a photo mode and will let you take whatever screenshot you're going for. And props to Coffee Stain for increasing the range from the initial distance, which was way too short. You can also hide the entire UI by pressing T in case you want to screen record with nothing else in the way of UI. Additionally, you can press F to focus, but until we start adjusting other settings, this isn't going to do anything yet. Now let's follow the hotkey to press Tab to show settings. Here, the first setting is to change the camera mode between first person and decoupled again. Next is zoom. This one is pretty self-explanatory, and this is actually the only setting that Photo Mode had before, though this zoom allows you to drag a bar or set the exact number by typing it in, instead of just using the scroll wheel, which you can still do. Next is roll, which just rolls the camera in either direction, so you can get that famous Dutch angle. Aperture is probably the most fun setting that will result in cool and cinematic screenshots. Now, if you don't know anything about cameras, you may be familiar with the word aperture from Portal, with the company Aperture Science. Their logo is a camera aperture. Basically, an aperture is an opening that controls how much light is allowed to enter a camera lens. Normally, this affects exposure and depth of field, that being kind of like brightness and blurriness. But in-game, it seems to only affect depth of field, like this. And this makes sense, because this isn't a real camera that's constrained by silly laws of physics, so there's no reason to change the exposure at the same time. On cameras, aperture is usually represented by an F with a slash and then a number. In the case of the game, it looks like they just went with a number, which for sure makes it less confusing, and the number does seem to match real-world apertures. So if you're a photographer, this should kind of feel somewhat natural. The numbering system is slightly confusing though for non-photographers. A bigger number means an aperture is small and more closed, and a small number indicates a large and wide open aperture. This is because they actually represent fractions rather than whole numbers. Anyways, this could be an hour-long video talking about the math of aperture, as it is fairly complex, but that's not the point of this video, and it's not important for understanding photo mode, but there's a little bit of background for you. Satisfactory's aperture starts at 24, which indicates a very small aperture with a very wide depth of field with almost everything in focus. This tracks, as it's clearly the default view for the game. There is no built-in depth of field in this game. You can see everything in equal focus no matter how far away it is. But while the average real-life camera lens usually tops out at 2.8 or 1.4, Satisfactory goes all the way down to 0.01. Yeah, you're probably not going to use that. I mean, just look at this. The lowest practical aperture you're going to use is about 0.1, right about here. And even that is only going to be for very up-close images like this, where almost everything except the subject is super blurry. But still, the impossibly small aperture values are really nice and can make some very interesting screenshots for sure. Focus mode changes between manual focus, autofocus, and tracking. This option will be grayed out until you adjust the aperture. Manual focus requires you to set the focus distance with a slider manually. You can also press the Set button to automatically move the slider to a focus point that the center of the camera is looking at. Autofocus will, well, automatically focus. It focuses the camera based on what the center point is looking at, and it'll adjust this as you move around. The third mode, tracking, allows you to click the set button when the center point is aimed at something, and then the camera will continually adjust the focus so that no matter where you move, that point is always in focus. Combine aperture adjustments with setting focus to get the best results. For example, you may mess with the aperture and get a blurry mess, but by focusing to the right distance, you can get a really cool, in-focus picture of your desired subject. Below that is grid, which cycles through various grids. These can be useful for centering your subject or otherwise balancing what's in your shot, but rest assured that they won't show up in your final screenshot. Next is crop, which will automatically crop your image to a certain aspect ratio. Meanwhile, the overlay still shows the rest of the game, just darkened. This can be useful for getting cinematic ultra-wide images or taking a vertical image for a phone background. So those are all of the settings that you might find on a physical camera device. But the Image tab includes the settings that you might find and adjust in editing software like Adobe Lightroom after taking the photo. Adjusting these settings in-game gives you a lot more control. The first category here is color correction. Exposure works kind of like brightness, but while brightness would lift the brightness of everything in the game, exposure tends to start by blowing out the highlights, or the whitest parts of the image. In terms of satisfactory screenshots, this can help brighten a shot and get more detail out of a darker scene. Saturation will universally lift or drop the colors in the image. Less is more with increased saturation, as it doesn't take much to make colors pop. Max saturation here just makes the orange and the greens just a little too cartoony. This kind of just looks like Fortnite now. Bringing it all the way down will result in a black and white or grayscale image. I'm also holding out hope that we get a vibrance control as well. Vibrance only boosts less saturated colors in a photo, which allows you to add more color to an image without absolutely burning your retinas on the colors that are already quite saturated. Contrast is next. This controls the difference in brightness and color between the lightest and darkest parts of an image. Dropping it all the way down will result in just a gray mass, while spiking it all the way up will create an image that can occasionally feel jagged and deep fried. Again, these colors are a little crazy, and if we add saturation to the mix, oh boy, that is definitely a style. Both of these results are pretty undesirable, so you'll likely be making small adjustments to help your subject stand out or to blend things together. This can be one of the most powerful tools in photography for evoking a certain mood, as it can change an image from soft to hard, so to speak. For example, contrast on 1 in this shot is pretty boring and bland, but increasing it a little bit darkens the shadows and makes the color stand out quite a lot. And I think it makes the screenshot look a lot better. Tint controls the color tint of the image. You can go through the entire rainbow here. While you can use this to essentially just put a color filter over your image, its intended purpose is for white balance, or correcting an image that is too far into one color and painting the whole image in a way that you don't desire. You can use it to adjust the feel or mood of the image to your taste though. For example, by making it look colder or warmer. If you like a color but it's too intense, you can also change the tint intensity using the slider. For example, I think this scene with just a little bit of blue makes it look pretty good. But at full blue, it's simply too strong and unnatural. Color filter cycles through several, different color filters. These are essentially like Instagram filters. There are various presets like sepia, vibrant, orange and teal, and various vintage and stylistic filters. And of course, the color filter strength slider will adjust how strongly this effect is applied, so you can add just a subtle addition if you like. The next category is effect settings. This is positioned after color correction because usually in digital photo editing, you want to get your base image to a good enough state through adjustments like exposure and tint, then apply more drastic effects once you've improved that initial picture. So the first setting here is effect filter, and this lets you cycle between some of the effects that you can apply. There are some really cool and dramatic ones, and I think most people are just going to get the most out of applying these effects and probably not doing much else, because these change the image quite a lot. like with comic or VHS or poster. Below that, you can adjust how strong the filter is applied once again. Although some of these do add quite a few other effects, so adjusting them might be a little weird. For example, pixel posterized, if you go all the way to -1, is actually more posterized and more pixely. So you can adjust this to get a desired effect that is even more or less extreme than the initial effect. Bloom adjusts how much lights shine. You might not realize just how many lights there are on factory machines until you start increasing your bloom. But oh my god, there are a lot of them. Just look at all those indicator lights and all the lights on the belts. Yeah, it adds up fast. And you can get some really cool cinematic shots this way with lowering the aperture. Just look at that bokeh. Compare max bloom against no bloom. Pretty boring. As you increase the bloom, it looks a lot more like a lot of the Satisfactory trailers that we've seen over the years. Now we're getting real weird because the next one is aberration. So aberration is the separation of the red, blue, and green layers of the image, and offsetting them with this slider can cause a glitchy or fuzzy looking image. Definitely not something you're going to use often, but it'll be really cool when you do. Perhaps combined with the VHS filter. Look at that. A slight bit of aberration turns it into a 90s security camera. Vignette simply creates a dark oval shadow around the image, and you can make it a very tiny circle that blacks out almost everything, which could be useful for some screenshots. Putting the slider all the way to the left or right has an extreme effect that you should use sparingly, and Vignette is just another example of that. Vignette should be used sparingly. A small amount of it can go a long way. If I showed you this picture versus this, you'd notice something, but if you only saw this much vignette with no comparison, you might not really think that it's there. But it does a lot to focus your eyes on the center of the image and not so much on the outsides. It's useful for drawing the viewer's eye to your subject and taking attention away from the background, and less is definitely more. The last setting here is grain, which is just old school film grain. This can be useful when combined with other settings as it makes it look kind of vintage and like it was taken on film. Now, if you decouple your camera from the Pioneer, you will be able to see a new tab called Pioneer. And now we can see our Pioneer in the world, which is why the first setting here is pose. You can cycle through a ton of poses and emotes, including I believe all the ones that are in the game already. And you can really spice up your photo. You can also completely hide the Pioneer if you want to. If you do want the Pioneer getting in the way, you can cause our neck to cursorily jerk toward the camera with the Look Toward Camera button. As cursed as it can look, this is actually useful for getting a good pose with the Pioneer while also getting the angle that you want. And as long as it's on, the head will follow the camera, which again, a little creepy. Luckily, it doesn't turn 180, there is a limit. Next is the positioning category, which lets you rotate or nudge the Pioneer from inside the camera view. If you couldn't get them into just the right position from the normal first-person perspective, this lets you just get things perfect. Doesn't move it a lot, but just enough to make tiny little adjustments. Up next is my favorite part of photo mode, because another button appears when you decouple the camera, and that is Dolly settings. Dolly is a filmmaking term that refers to a shot where a camera is mounted on a wheeled cart that is itself often on tracks, and it's able to be moved forward, backwards, or sideways, smoothly and purposefully. Since Satisfactory is a video game, we have access to a magical flying dolly, which is awfully convenient, so we can put this camera anywhere. Essentially how a dolly works in this game is that the camera will move between a start and an end point that you manually set. The motion that it does will include any horizontal, vertical, or rotational changes it needs to make to transition from one to the other. So let's move our camera to the starting point. Let's say right here, looking at our Pioneer, and we'll just click Set Start Point. And then we'll use the camera controls to move around, let's say up to this floor, and looking at the factory from this direction. And we'll say Set End Point. Now don't worry about what you do in between these 2 points. This is not a truck route, there are not nodes, you cannot control precisely what happens between point A and point B. So just don't worry about the route you take to get there, just get there. The camera will happily clip through whatever it needs to in order to find the most efficient route. So luckily this can be edited, which we'll go into a little later. So now to go back to the beginning of this animation, you're going to click the little back button here, and then you can click the play button. And here we have our first animation. Not bad. Now you might be thinking, this shot's alright, but it's far from perfect. It's a little bit too fast and it's not particularly smooth. Now, if the problem with this is where the camera starts or ends or where it travels to, you can actually easily adjust that. Just stop the animation, move the camera around, and now we can click Set Start Point again, and this is the new start point, but the end point has not been cleared. Nothing is overridden until we manually override it. So now we can press play, go back to the beginning, press play, and it'll start from that new place and go to the same endpoint that we already established, and it'll adjust the animation in between to move between those 2 points. So the first Dolly setting here is duration. The default is 5 seconds, but you can adjust it down all the way down to 2 seconds, or make it as long as 40 seconds. The longer the time, the slower the motion. 5 seconds is going to be too short for a lot of big sweeping factory animations, so you're probably going to want to make it a little bit longer, and 40 seconds is plenty long. Next is lock on to tracking point. This is either on or off, and then the setting below it is set tracking point. So clicking set while the camera is aimed at something will set that point as the tracking point for the dolly shot. And this actually changes the animation so that the camera moves from the start point to the end point, but it will always be looking at the point that you've set as the tracking point. This is probably the easiest way to control what exactly your camera is looking at. Now, given what we've done here, this isn't going to be perfect, but let's go ahead and set the Pioneer as the tracking point and press play. Okay, not bad. Blend camera settings is a bit of a weird setting, and I feel like I'm misinterpreting it, so let me know in the comments if you know what this means. While you are not watching a dolly animation, turning it on doesn't seem to do anything. But while a dolly animation is playing, toggling it on seems to reset your camera settings. So let's turn on Aperture, and then if we click Blend Camera Settings, it changes the aperture, and now we can't change it during this animation. And if I turn it off again, the aperture is still reset and doesn't go back to what it was before. So I'm not really sure what this is doing or what it's blending, but maybe avoid this one until we figure out a better use for it. So next up is interpolation. This means a couple of different things in video, so it's a bit of an odd word choice perhaps, but what it's essentially referring to is keyframe interpolation, or filling in the data between 2 known points. What the interpolation setting does is decide what sort of animation curve is applied to the dolly motion. You might think of this as a transition, which is maybe what I would have called it, but you know, as long as we all know what it means, it's fine. So linear interpolation, which is what you're seeing right now, is the default, and it means your animation will move rather harshly from start to end. Objects in nature don't tend to move like this, so it often feels unnatural for a movement like this to have no acceleration. That's when we might want to use a different type of interpolation. There are 2 animation options to achieve a smoother result, those being eases and expo, and they can be in, out, or both. In refers to the beginning of the shot, and out refers to the end of the shot. An ease is an animation that starts slow, then ramps up to a faster speed. As you can see, the beginning part of the animation, where the camera goes past the Pioneer, has the animation applied because it's ease in, and then once we get to the end point, that is just linear still. And if we go to ease in and out, we'll have a smooth animation on both. Expo is short for exponential. It creates an exponential curve with its animation. As you can see, an expo animation starts very, very slow and then quickly ramps up to an insanely fast speed. So to sum it up, linear is abrupt but consistent, ease smoothly ramps in and out, and spends more time in the middle of the animation, while Expo ramps smoothly in and out, but spends more time on the transition than what's actually in the middle. Each has its own use case to create a unique movement. You can also essentially modulate how fast and slow these transitions are by adjusting the duration. You can see when I up the duration on Expo, it basically comes to a complete grinding halt when you're at the beginning and end of the animation, but then the middle of the animation is perhaps a little more reasonable. No matter which one you use, you can hide the UI with the T key and use external screen recording software to record whatever movement is playing. All of the animations will just go back and forth until you stop it. Now finally, to see your screenshots that you've taken, you can click on the Screenshots folder button, which will automatically open the folder on your computer, and then you're good to go. So that is the new photo mode in Satisfactory. This is for experimental only as it stands currently, but it'll be on the stable branch at some point, and we'll maybe have some updates. So if there's anything major that happens between this video and that, I'll be sure to put a note in the pinned comment. So if you are seeing this far in the future, check the comments for any corrections or additions. But this is going to be the bulk of it, so hopefully this video still applies. If you enjoyed this tutorial and want more like it, feel free to subscribe and give this video a like so I know that you found it useful. Now have fun taking your photos, and I can't wait to see them on Reddit and Twitter and everywhere else.